Right, we want to discuss what ecology is, because that's one of the things that you have to know for the pre-nursing exam. So what is ecology? Ecology basically is the study of the interactions of living things with each other and their physical environment. The living things on Earth may be organized into 4 different levels of ecological organization. These levels of organization are: 1, the population. So when we talk about population, we're talking about all members of one species in an area. Members of one species means they're from the same species living in an area. In a community, talk about members of different interacting species in an area. So it means different populations put together. So we can think about this as having a population there is a population, then you have another population, different populations. So if we put all this together, then you have what we call a community. All right, that's community. All right, so that's what we're talking about here. Different populations put together. Then when you refer to the ecosystem, we are talking about all the members of the community by abiotic, which means the physical factors influencing them. The physical factors would be something like temperature, pressure, humidity, and so on. Those are the physical factors that affect the community. So the community plus abiotic factors is equal to the ecosystem. So we can look at this as the community here plus all the factors, physical factors, the abiotic factors. And as I said, this includes the temperature, the humidity, and so on, pressure, etc. So all this represents the abiotic factors. Abiotic factors. So if you put that together, then you have the ecosystem. It forms the ecosystem. Okay, so this is how it looks like in diagram form. Then we have the biosphere. So we say biosphere. Biosphere refers to the entire region of the Earth where living things may be found. So wherever you find living things, that represents the biosphere. Bio is living, sphere is like part of the Earth, right? So biosphere. Good. So those are some key terms that you have to know when you're talking about ecology. Right? Now, with that knowledge, let's look at some nutritional interactions that you have to know about. And some of the nutritional interactions that you have to know about are you have to know about the producers, you have to know about consumers, and you have to know about the decomposers. Okay, these are 3 key things you have to know when talking about nutritional interactions. So under nutritional interactions, we'll say that all ecosystems must have 3 basic kinds of nutritional interactions in order to be stable and self-sustaining. These nutritional interactions involve producers, consumers, and decomposers. Right. So what is a producer? So basically, the producer is the organism. Which is a producer organism is one that is capable of trapping the sun's energy to make glucose sugar in the process of photosynthesis. In other words, they can make their own food, right? They try to use the sunlight to make their own food. And example will be like plants and algae are examples of producers. They can make their own food. So producer organisms are also called autotrophs. So also called an autotrophs. So you see autotrophs, you're talking of a producer organism. They can make their own food. So autotrophs produce their own food from inorganic substances. Right. Now, what are consumers? Consumer organisms depend upon and eat other organisms for their food. In other words, they cannot make their own food. They can't make their own food. They have to rely on the producers for food. So consumer organisms are also called the heterotrophs. Heterotroph, that's another name for consumer organisms. So remember, autotrophs, self-feeding, and then heterotrophs. They can't feed themselves. They have to rely on the producers for food. And we can break this down to herbivores that eat primarily plant material, carnivores that feed on other animals, and omnivores that feed on both plants and animal material. Okay, so an example of omnivores would be human beings, because we eat both plants and animals. Right? Then we have the decomposers. The decomposers, this is a special category of consumer organism. So the decomposers, basically, they end up breaking down dead organic matter and they change it to simpler nutrients, which can be recycled in the ecosystem. And this includes like bacteria and fungi, right? So decomposers are very important members of the ecosystem, or of what you call the food chain, which we talk about basically. We're going to talk about that soon. So they're important members of the food chain, but usually they are not shown on the food chain. They're not shown on the food chain, right? So now let's look at the concept of what a food chain is, the basic concept of food chain. Now, when you take the food chain, it shows, it's a diagram that shows organisms being fed, feeding and being fed upon, right? So here we say food chain is a single chain showing one organism eaten by another, which in turn is eaten up by another organism. So you have producers, the first group, then they provide food for the primary consumer. Then primary consumer provide food for secondary consumer, and so on. And then secondary consumer provide food for the tertiary consumer. So when you have a question like this, you follow the arrow, just for the arrow. All right. So this produce food for that, this produce for this produce food for that. Right. So let's look at an example of a food chain, a typical example of food chain. Now, an example of a food chain is what I have here. Okay, you have grass is eaten by grasshopper, which is then fed upon by a toad, and the toad is eaten by a snake. Right. So this is how it represents grass, the arrow, grasshopper, arrow, toad, arrow, snake, arrow to hawk. So grass produces food for grasshopper, grasshopper produces food for toad, toad produces food for snake, snake produces for hawk. Or you can read it as grasshopper feeds on grass, toad feeds on grasshopper, snake feeds on toad, and then hawk feeds on snake. So that is the food chain. Now we'll look at questions very soon on this. For example, if a question like, what will happen to the grasshopper population if there's no grass, right? Or the grass is bent down, right? So basically, this is the source of food is cut off here. So the grasshopper will not have anything to feed on. So the population will go down. What will happen to the toad population if all the grasshoppers die or they're destroyed? Then the toad population would go down because there's no source of food here based on this food chain, right? So those are type of questions you should have to think about. And then what's an important member of the ecosystem of this food chain that is not shown? A question like this, then you have to think about decomposers. The decomposers are not shown on this diagram, even though they're important members of the food chain. So keep that in mind when you see a question. Okay, right. Another question like, what is the source of energy for the producer? So you have to know the producer is grass. So the energy comes from sunlight. Okay. Another question could get to be, which of the following is a secondary consumer? The secondary consumer. Then you have a list, maybe grasshopper, toad, snake, and hawk. So you quickly have to think about the secondary consumer. It's primary, secondary. So this one, the toad will be the secondary consumer. So primary, secondary, and so on. So you have to think about questions like this. All right. Now, we also have a more complex diagram, and a more complex diagram is known as the food web. So the food web is another representation of the nutritional interactions. So what is a food web? Now, most animals are part of more than one food chain and eat more than one kind of food in order to meet their food and energy requirements. Right? So these interconnected food chains form the food web. So they rely on one source of food to meet their food and energy requirements. So in other words, we are saying that the food web is made up of more than one food chain. So let's trace some of them to see. You have the grass, that's the producer. So the producer produces food for, the grass produces food for grasshopper, grasshopper for toad, toad for snake, and snake for hawk. As I say, you follow the arrow. So that's one food chain. I can have another food chain from here, grass. Grass produces food for rabbit, rabbit produces for hawk, and then that ends here. Or I can go grass produces food for rabbit, rabbit is food for snake, the snake is food for the hawk. So this is another food chain. So I have 3 food chains in this diagram, making up the food web. So that's another representation. Okay. So again, you can have questions like, what will happen to the like it's happened to the toad population if maybe the grasshopper population goes down? So it's cut off here, the source of food cut off here. So what is going to happen? So if this is off, then it means that toad will not have any source of food. So the toad population will go down. Okay. A question like, what is likely to happen to the snake population when the toad population is down? If the toad population is down, this is down. Now what's happening? The snake still has food coming from the rabbits. So in that case, the source of food is not completely cut off. Something is coming from this end. So the population of the snake is unlikely to change. So that is what we can hypothesize. It's unlikely to change because it still has some source of food from here, right? So those are options. That's the answer that you have to choose. Unlikely to change. It's not going to go down, but it's unlikely to change. It remain the same, okay, and so on. So always look out for alternate source of food. If there's an alternate source of food, then it's unlikely to change. If the food supply is totally cut off, then the population of the consumer will go down, and so on. You can also be asked the other question, which one is the primary consumer, which one is the secondary consumer, and so on, or which important member of this food web is not shown on this diagram. And then you know it's a decomposer and so on. All right. Now the third diagram that shows the interaction is also called a food pyramid. And that's just basically the pyramid like this. The base is always the producers. So the producers, then you have the primary consumer, secondary consumer, and then the tertiary consumer, and so on, right? So a change in the size of one population in the food chain will affect other populations. So there's a change here, it will affect what the population at the top, and so on. So you should still think about it the way we thought about the changes that can occur in the food chain and the food web. Very similar. Okay. Good. So the other types of, so I have some quick questions here for you to think about. We've discussed that already, but we can go through, I would like to go through this quickly with you so that you know exactly what to expect. So say this interdependence of the population within a food chain helps to maintain the balance of plant and animal populations within the community. For example, when there are too many grasshoppers, there will be insufficient trees and shrubs for all of them to eat. Many grasshoppers will starve and die. Fewer grasshoppers means more time for the trees and the shrubs to grow to maturity and multiply. Fewer grasshoppers also means less food is available for the toads to eat, and some toads will starve to death. When there are fewer toads, the grasshopper population will increase, right? So changes in any of these populations affect the other. That's what we're trying to say here, all right? So think about these questions. Predict the effect of low population of snakes in the pyramid that is just been shown. And another question I want you to think about, which category of consumer organism is usually not shown in the food chain or food pyramid? We just discussed that, but think about this as you watch this video. All right. The other source of other means of feeding relationship categories, and I would like us to go through that as well. Now, when you say the word symbiosis refers to the interaction or relationship between two or more species for a long period of time. So we're talking about symbiosis, right? So when you have symbiosis, say this is interaction or relation between two or more species for a long period of time, competing for food supply, eating, that's predation, and avoiding predation. Right? So these are that's a definition for symbiosis. Okay. And what are the examples of symbiosis? Examples of symbiosis are parasitism, we have commensalism, and we have mutualism and saprophytism. Those are the four categories of symbiosis, the feeding relationship over between two or more species over a long period of time. So what's parasitism? So parasitism, think of parasite, let that come to your mind, right? Parasitism is a feeding relationship in which one organism benefits and the other is harmed. So one benefits, there's benefits for one organism, the other one is harmed. So think of parasitism as injury or injured. Example of parasitism, let's think of like viruses that cause diseases, or bacteria that cause disease, or fungi and protozoa that cause disease. They are causing injury to the organism that they live on or feed on, where they find themselves. They cause injury. So that's a parasitic relationship. Parasitic relationship. One benefits, the other is harm. There should be injury somewhere. One should be injured for you to say they're dealing with parasitism. Right. Then the second one is commensalism. So this is a feeding relationship in which one organism benefits and the other does not benefit, and it is not harmed. So neither benefits or gets harmed. In other words, one organism consumes unused food of another, right? So the other unused food of the other. What are some examples? An example is a remora fish and then the shark. You may have seen this on the TV somewhere, or maybe those who watch National Geographic. Sometimes they show it on the TV. You see the shark swimming and these small fishes swimming on the side of the shark. Those are the remora fish. Sometimes they attach themselves temporarily to the shark. What do? When the shark feeds, the remora picks up the scraps, the leftovers, the food that fall out of the mouth of the shark. That's what they pick up. So the shark makes no attempt to prey on the remora. They just feed on the leftovers. So who is benefiting? The person that the organism benefiting is a remora fish, getting food, source of food are the crumbs that fall off. The shark, there's no injury, there's no harm, doesn't get any benefit from that relationship. So this is an example of commensalism. Okay. And many bacteria living in our large intestine feed on food in the gut, and they just don't harm us. They just live there. They benefit and we don't benefit at all. We're just there. Okay, so that is commensalism. Then mutualism, when a mutual relationship, mutualism. So this is a feeding relationship in which both organisms benefit. Example, we take the crocodile, right, called the Nile crocodile. There's a cleaning symbiosis relationship between the Nile crocodile and then what we call the Egyptian plover. Now the Nile crocodile opens its mouth and allows the Egyptian plover to feed on leeches attached to its gum. So the leeches are causing attack your gum and they cause disease. They cause damage, gum disease. But the Egyptian plover feeds on these leeches, so they get rid of the leeches from the gum. So what is happening here? The crocodile is benefiting from the cleaning, the leaching plover feeding on the leeches. So they're getting rid of the leeches from the gum. So the crocodile is benefiting from the cleaning process because they are relieved of the disease, while the leaching plover gains food. It's getting food from the leeches. So there's that mutual benefit of both for both organisms. One is getting food, the other is getting cleaned up and relieve of disease. So that's a mutual benefit. So you have mutualism. Then the last one is saprophytism. Saprophytism. So what's a saprophyte? What's a saprophyte, right? That's why you have to think about what is a saprophyte. So saprophytism. This is a feeding relationship in which the organism feeds on non-living materials. It feeds on non-living materials. An example is the mold, the fungus living on bread, non-living matter, right? Bread is non-living. So the fungus, living matter, feed on non-living matter. This is an example of saprophytism. So the fungus is a saprophyte, right? So that is what we want to talk about today, saprophyte. So we'll end our lesson here on ecology. We'll continue with tropism in plants in the next video.